Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden story behind every disaster. You know that pattern that explains why some places bounce back and others, well, they're never quite the same? We're going to break down the one model that shows us exactly how that story unfolds. So, it all kicks off with this really big question. You can have a massive earthquake hit one part of the world, and another one with the exact same power hits somewhere else. But why are the outcomes, the actual human toll, so incredibly different? That's the puzzle we're tackling today. And to really get our heads around this, we've got to look at a real-world comparison. It's a story that just perfectly captures why these outcomes can be so worlds apart. Just think about it for a second. A huge earthquake strikes a super-prepared, wealthy nation like Japan, and then a similar one hits a place with far fewer resources like Haiti. The physical event? Pretty similar. But the human impact? It's not even in the same ballpark. This is going to be our guidepost as we unpack exactly why. Okay, so how do we actually map this difference in a way that makes sense? Well, geographers and disaster planners have this amazing framework they use to chart the entire process from start to finish. And here it is. It's called the PARC model, though you might also hear it called the disaster response curve. All it is really is a simple graph that tells the story of a community's well-being before, during, and after a disaster strikes. It's surprisingly powerful. And the graph itself couldn't be simpler, which is why it's so brilliant. Along the bottom, you have time passing, and up the side, you have a measure of quality of life. Things like safe housing, access to healthcare, jobs, all that stuff. This basic grid is what we're going to use to tell the entire story. All right, let's start walking through the story on this graph, right, from the moment the hazard hits. So, the model breaks everything down into three big phases. First, you have the hazard itself, which causes this massive, sudden disruption. Then, right after, comes the emergency response. And finally, you have the long, slow process of recovery. So let's look at that first big drop. This is what we call the crisis phase. On the graph, it's that dramatic, steep nosedive. That line, plunging downwards, represents the immediate, devastating shock of the event. It's a picture of homes being destroyed, power lines snapping, and a whole community just being thrown into absolute chaos. Now, here's what's absolutely crucial. What happens next, how deep that curve drops, and how long it stays down there. That almost completely depends on how fast and how good the emergency response is. A really well-organized response can basically stop that freefall and start the climb back up way sooner. And right here, this is where the stories really start to split. See, the road to recovery isn't the same for everybody. In fact, the model shows us there are three very, very different paths a community can take. This table just lays it all out so clearly. Look at how things change depending on a country's development. For developed nations, the hit is often less severe, and the recovery is fast. For emerging economies, it's a bit slower, a longer grind. But for developing nations, the impact is just devastating. Recovery is painfully slow, and, this is the toughest part, they may never actually get back to where they started. And for those developed countries, there's another huge advantage. They often have the resources to not just rebuild, but to build back better. This idea is a total game changer. It means they use the recovery as an opportunity to create stronger buildings, better warning systems, things that actually leave them safer and with a higher quality of life than before the disaster even happened. So, what is it? What's the one thing that decides which of these paths a country is going to follow? Well, it all boils down to one incredibly important word. Resilience, that's the key. It's all about a community's ability to take a punch and get back on its feet. And resilience isn't just about money. It's about having solid infrastructure, a government that people can trust, citizens who know what to do in an emergency, and having plans already figured out before the worst happens. So let's circle back to our original example, Japan and Haiti. On one side, you have Japan, which has all the signs of high resilience. Earthquake-proof buildings, regular public drills, a lightning-fast response system. On the other side, you have Haiti, which was facing the disaster with so much vulnerability, from widespread poverty to poorly built housing. You can just imagine how wildly different the PARC model curve would look for each of them. So you might be thinking, okay, cool graph, interesting theory, but why does understanding this model really matter? What's the big takeaway for us? Well, it matters because it forces us to look past the breaking news headlines. For disaster planners, it's a tool to see what works and what doesn't. But for all of us, it's like a mirror. It shows us the undeniable link between a country's development and its people's safety. It gives us a stark visual way to understand the global inequalities that disasters always expose. And that really leaves us with one final massive question. The park model is amazing at showing us the story of what happened. But the real challenge is this. Can we take its lessons about preparedness, development, and building resilience to actually change the shape of that curve for the next disaster? Can we, rewrite the ending for the world's most vulnerable communities?